I bought a house without telling my parents. When they found out, they said, "Great. Now your brother will have a home office and his kids will have more space." I said no. They went nuclear. Sup Reddit. My family, who treated me like shit my whole life, expected me to buy them a house, then tried to move in without permission. The amount of delusion and entitlement you're going to hear in this story is unreal, so bear with me until the end. It's worth it. So I'm 28 male, a welder from Knoxville, Tennessee, and I need to tell you guys about the most satisfying nuclear option I've ever pulled on my family. But first, you gotta understand the setup. My older brother Jared is 32 and has been the golden boy since we were kids. I'm talking about full-blown favorite child syndrome here. This dude could have burned down the house, and my parents would have blamed the matches. Let me paint you a picture with just 2 moments that'll tell you everything you need to know about the family dynamics. I was 14, working weekends at Ace Hardware, making $7.25 an hour, saving every penny for 6 months to buy a PlayStation 3. 6 freaking months of dealing with contractors asking me where the left-handed screwdrivers were kept, all so I could save up $400 for this console. The day I finally have enough money, I come home to find Jared, who's 17 and hasn't worked a day in his life, playing on a brand new PS3 in the living room. "Oh, your father and I thought Jared deserved something nice for getting a C+ in chemistry," Mom says, not even looking up from her cooking show. "You understand, honey? Jared has been struggling. Struggling. The kid had been failing chemistry because he spent every class period texting girls and vaping in the bathroom. Meanwhile, I'm pulling A's and B's while working weekends. And somehow that makes me less deserving of a freaking video game console." "What about my money?" I asked. "Well, now you can save it for something more practical," Dad chimed in. "Maybe some new work boots." Jared? This asshole looks me dead in the eye and says, "Thanks for doing all that saving, little bro. Really took the pressure off me having to work for this." The only person who ever called out their bullshit was my grandpa Joe. That man was pure old school tough, fought in Korea, worked construction for 40 years, and drove a 1969 Dodge Charger RT that sounded like pure American thunder. He was the one who taught me how to use tools, how to fix things, and how to spot bullshit from a mile away. "Your parents think they're being fair," he told me once while we were changing the oil in his Charger. "But fair doesn't mean equal when one kid's a worker and the other's a taker. You remember that, Blake? You've got something your brother will never have." "What's that?" "Backbone, and the sense to use it when it matters. When Grandpa passed during my junior year of high school, he left me that Charger. Mom and Dad immediately started pressuring me to sell it. That car is worth money. It's just going to sit there and rot. What's the point?" The point was that it was mine. The first thing in my life that was truly, completely mine. I kept that car in storage, paying the $45 monthly fee out of my Ace Hardware paychecks. And every month when I wrote that check, I thought about Grandpa's words. Now let me tell you about the college thing. I'm getting ready for college. Busted my ass through high school, shop classes, worked nights at the hardware store helping contractors find the right bolts and explaining why they needed galvanized screws for outdoor projects. Got accepted to University of Tennessee, figured I'd live at home to save money like a responsible adult. Jared had gone to Vanderbilt, his dream school, and my parents covered everything. Tuition, room, board, even his frat dues so he could play beer pong and network with other trust fund babies. So naturally, I assumed they'd help me out too. Wrong. Dead wrong. I'll never forget the conversation. I'm sitting at the kitchen table, acceptance letter in hand, ready to talk logistics. Mom's making her famous pot roast, and I bring up college expenses. "If you're staying here, you'll need to contribute," she says, casually as discussing the weather. "Jared earned his full ride from us because he deserved it. You need to learn independence. Contribute." Turned out that meant $350 a month for rent and utilities, plus buying my own groceries. That might not sound like much until you're an 18-year-old college freshman making minimum wage and trying to afford textbooks. I tried to argue, and reminded them how they'd covered everything for Jared, how he'd never worried about money while pledging Sigma Chi and posting Instagram stories from Nashville rooftop parties. Mom just shrugged. "We gave Jared what he needed. You're different, Blake. You're independent. You'll figure it out." So I did. Picked up extra shifts at Ace Hardware, sometimes working until midnight stocking shelves and helping weekend warriors find their paint supplies. I'd walk past the campus Starbucks every morning, watching other students grab their $6 lattes and breakfast sandwiches, while I nursed my thermos of home-brewed coffee and ate peanut butter banana sandwiches I'd made at 6 a.m. Every month, I'd hand over that $350 to my parents while Jared called home complaining about how the dining hall wasn't organic enough. They'd actually send him care packages. I found the receipt once. $85 worth of his favorite snacks, plus a $50 Kroger gift card. The inequality was suffocating, but I kept telling myself it would pay off eventually. The only thing that kept me sane was knowing Grandpa's charger was waiting for me in that storage unit. Every month, I'd remind myself that someday I'd have a garage and the time to bring her back to life. After graduation, I got the hell out of that house and found a cramped studio in Knoxville. That's where my childhood best friend Mason came through like the legend he is. This dude showed up with his beat-up Ford pickup, a cooler full of drinks, and 0 questions asked. "So we're moving you out of the family fun house?" he said, loading boxes into his truck bed. About damn time. Mason's a mechanic. Always has an opinion about everything. We'd been tight since middle school, bonding over shop class and our mutual hatred of pretentious dickheads. While other kids were worried about who was dating who, we were learning to rebuild engines and calling out bullshit when we saw it. "Your parents know you're bouncing?" he asked, hefting my pathetic excuse for a couch. "They'll figure it out when I stop paying rent," I said. Savage. I respect that. The man helped me move everything I owned in 2 trips. Didn't even bitch when we had to carry my mattress up 3 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken. When we were done, he cracked open 2 drinks and looked around my shoebox apartment. "Well," he said, "it's small as hell, but at least it's yours." That's Mason for you. Brutal honesty wrapped in loyalty. I started my career as an entry-level welder at a fabrication shop, worked long hours, lived on frozen dinners and pure determination. Mason would swing by after his shifts at the auto shop, usually with takeout and stories about the idiots who thought they could fix their own transmissions. "A customer came in today convinced his car was making noise because the government was tracking him," he'd say, demolishing a gas station burrito. Turned out his exhaust pipe was hanging by duct tape and a prayer. One night after a few drinks, I told him about the charger sitting in storage. "Wait, you've got a 69 RT just rotting in a storage unit?" he said, nearly choking on his drink. "Dude, that's like keeping a unicorn in a closet. Can't exactly work on it in my apartment parking lot," I said. "Fair point. But man, when you get a proper place, we're dragging that beast out and making her purr again." Meanwhile, Jared graduated with a communications degree and moved right back home. Spent his days playing Call of Duty and talking about his entrepreneurial ventures, while our parents continued bankrolling his existence. When he finally got a job at some marketing firm, they threw him a celebration dinner at Longhorn Steakhouse. When I got promoted to lead welder after 2 years of grinding 60-hour weeks and learning specialty TIG welding, they took me to Applebee's and spent the entire meal talking about how proud they were of Jared for finding his passion. Then Jared starts dating Jessica. Sweet girl, but she'd never held a job for more than 6 months and thought budgeting was a foreign language. Our parents welcomed her like she was royalty. They got married in a ceremony that cost more than my first truck. Parents footed the bill for everything from the flowers to the open bar. After the wedding, Jared and Jessica move into a house that our parents helped them buy. Not a loan, a gift. They called it their investment in the family's future. Soon enough, the kids started coming. Mason Jr., then Lily, then baby Emma. My parents transformed into the most devoted grandparents on the planet, buying toys, clothes, offering to babysit whenever Jared and Jessica wanted date nights. They set up college funds for each kid and started planning Dollywood vacations. I tried not to let it bother me. I really did. But every family gathering was a reminder of exactly where I stood in the family. The kids would run around showing off their new toys, while I sat in the corner watching my parents dote on them. Jared and Jessica would complain about parenthood challenges, and Mom would immediately offer solutions. More babysitting, home-cooked meals, help with the mortgage when times got tough. I started skipping family events. It was easier than pretending everything was fine. "Good," Mason said when I told him I was done with Sunday dinners. "Those people are toxic as hell. Spend your weekends doing shit that actually matters." Then I decided it was time to buy a house. I'd been saving for years, living below my means, putting away every extra dollar. Had enough for a down payment and was tired of throwing money away on rent. But more than that, I wanted something that was mine, something no one could take away or guilt trip me about. And honestly, I wanted a garage where I could finally work on the charger properly. Mason was immediately on board. "About time you stopped making your landlord rich," he said. "I know a good realtor. No bullshit. Won't try to sell you more house than you need." We spent weekends driving around looking at properties. Mason had this way of cutting through real estate speak that was pure gold. "This one's got great potential," he'd say, looking at a fixer-upper. Translation: It's a money pit that'll eat your savings and shit out regret. Or, open concept living space means they knocked down load-bearing walls and hoped for the best. Every house we looked at, I made sure to check out the garage situation. Most places had these tiny single-car garages that were more like storage closets. I needed space to actually work. I didn't tell my family about the house hunt, not because it was some big secret, but because I knew they'd find a way to make it about Jared and his growing family. They'd start suggesting properties that would be perfect for when the kids visit, or asking why I needed so much space when I was just one person. Smart move, Mason said when I told him. Tell them after you've got the keys. Harder to screw with a done deal. I should have known better. I don't know how word got out, but somehow it did. My co-worker Sandy, one of those people who treats other people's business like personal entertainment, mentioned to someone at her church group that I was house hunting, that someone happened to be Jessica's cousin. Before I knew it, the news had traveled through the family grapevine faster than gossip at a high school reunion. The call came on a Thursday evening. I was at my workbench cleaning my welding equipment when my phone rang. Blake! Mom's voice was unnaturally cheerful. Why didn't you tell us you're looking for a house? I should have played dumb, but I was exhausted and didn't have energy for games. I'm just browsing around. Nothing serious yet. Well, Jared and I have been talking, and we have some wonderful ideas for you. You're going to need something with at least 5 bedrooms. You know, for the kids when they visit. And it would be perfect if you could find something near Jared and Jessica's neighborhood. I stared at my welding helmet, trying to process what she just said. Mom, I don't need 5 bedrooms. I'm looking for something small, just for me. Oh, honey, you have to think bigger than that. This is a chance to really help the family. The kids are getting older, and Jared and Jessica's house is getting cramped. If you had a nice big place, they could visit more often, and we could all spend more time together. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache coming on. I'm not looking for a place for Jared's family to visit. I'm looking for a place for me to live. Don't be silly, Blake. Family is what matters most. You'll want space for everyone. After I hung up, I called Mason immediately. They want you to buy them a house, he said, after I explained the conversation. Not yourself. Them. They want you to be the bank and the bellhop. It's insane, right? Beyond insane. It's some next-level parasitic shit. How much you want to bet they've already picked out which rooms the kids are getting? The next day, house listings started flooding in. Mom and Jessica had apparently appointed themselves as my personal real estate team, sending me links to massive houses with swimming pools, guest suites, and price tags that made my eyes hurt. Every single one came with detailed explanations about how perfect it would be for family gatherings. Look at this one. Jessica texted with a link to a 6-bedroom colonial. The kids would love that backyard, and there's even a separate entrance for the in-law suite. I muted the group chat and kept looking on my own. Mason and I found it after weeks of searching. A beautiful 2-bedroom ranch house in Powell, about 20 minutes from downtown Knoxville. It had a covered front porch, original hardwood floors, and a kitchen that got perfect morning light. The backyard was just big enough for a vegetable garden, and there was a den off the living room that looked like it had been designed specifically for watching Sunday football. But the real selling point? A 2-car garage with a workbench, proper electrical, and enough space to actually work on a car. This is it, Mason said, walking through the house with me. Good bones, solid foundation, and best of all, only 2 bedrooms. Can't fit a whole damn commune in here. Check out this garage, I said, running my hand along the workbench. I could finally bring the charger home. Now you're talking. That baby's been locked up long enough. I put in an offer that same day. When it was accepted, I felt a rush of pure joy. This was it. This was mine. Congratulations, homeowner, Mason said, shaking my hand outside the realtor's office. Now the real fun begins, keeping the vultures away from your nest. I decided to wait until after closing to tell my family. I wanted to enjoy the moment without their input. That weekend, Mom called to invite me to Sunday dinner. We're having pot roast, she said, and we want to talk about your house search. I almost said no, but then I thought about how satisfying it would be to announce that I'd already bought a house. Let them realize their input wasn't necessary. Sure, I said. I'll be there. I had no idea I was walking into an ambush. I arrived at my parents' house in Farragut at exactly 6 p.m., mentally preparing for whatever lecture they had planned. The smell of pot roast filled the air, and I could hear the kids playing in the living room. Jared was sprawled on the couch scrolling through his phone while Jessica chased Emma around the coffee table. We gathered around the dining room table, and for the first few minutes, everything seemed normal. Dad complained about the Titans' latest losing streak. Jared talked about some project at work, and Jessica shared cute stories about the kids. I started to relax, thinking maybe this would just be a regular family dinner. Then Mom set down her fork and cleared her throat. "So, Blake," she said with that smile that never reached her eyes, "we've been doing some research, and we think we found the perfect house for you." Here we go, I thought. It's a gorgeous 5-bedroom house in Oak Ridge, just 15 minutes from Jared and Jessica's place. It has a huge backyard for the kids, a 3-car garage, and even a basement that Jared could turn into his home office. I blinked. His home office? Well, you know how cramped they are, Mom continued, as if this was the most reasonable thing in the world. The kids are sharing rooms, and Jared doesn't have anywhere quiet to work. If you had a bigger place, they could spread out when they visit. Visit? I repeated, though I was starting to get a sinking feeling about where this was going. Jessica jumped in, practically bouncing in her seat. "We've been talking about it, and it makes perfect sense. You have all this space, and we need more room for the kids to grow. We could probably stay with you most weekends, and maybe even longer during the summer." I stared at her, then at Jared, who was nodding along like this was completely normal. "You want to move in with me?" "Not move in," Jared said quickly. "Just visit a lot. You know, like family does." "It would be so perfect," Mom continued. "The kids would have their own space, and you'd finally have a house full of life and laughter. Plus, you'd be helping your brother's family, which is what families do." I felt like I was in some alternate reality. They were talking about my house, a house I hadn't even told them I'd bought yet, like it was a solution to everyone's problems but mine. "Actually," I said, setting down my fork, "I already bought a house." The room went dead silent. Even the kids stopped making noise in the living room. "What?" Mom's voice was sharp. "I bought a house," I repeated. "It's a 2-bedroom ranch. I closed on it last week." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Jared let out a laugh that didn't sound amused. "A 2-bedroom? Blake, what were you thinking? Where are we supposed to stay when we visit?" "Who said you're visiting?" I said simply. "It's my house. I bought it for me." Mom's face was turning red. "Blake, how could you make such a major decision without consulting us? We've been working so hard to find you the perfect place. This is so unreasonable." "I didn't need your help," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I knew what I wanted, and I bought it." "But what about us?" Jessica's voice was getting high and whiny. "We really need this, Blake. Do you know how hard it is to live in that tiny house with 3 kids? Mason Jr. and Lily have to share a room, and Emma's crib is in our bedroom. It's not fair to the children." I took a deep breath. "That's not my problem, Jessica." That's when Dad decided to join the conversation. He slammed his hand on the table so hard the water glasses jumped. "You're being selfish, Blake. Family helps family. What's wrong with you?" I stood up, my heart pounding. "I'm not selfish. I'm finally standing up for myself. And if that makes me the bad guy in your eyes, so be it." The room erupted. Mom was yelling about how she raised me better than this. Jessica was crying about how unfair it was to the kids. Jared was ranting about how I'd always been difficult. Dad just sat there shaking his head like I'd personally disappointed him. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. "You can't just walk away from your family like this," Mom shouted after me. I turned back one last time. "Watch me." Then I got in my truck and drove straight to Mason's shop. I found him under the hood of a Chevy Malibu, cursing at a stubborn alternator. "How'd the family dinner go?" he asked without looking up. "They wanted me to buy a 5-bedroom house so Jared and his family could move in." Mason straightened up, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "Come again?" I told him everything. The ambush, their plans, the explosive ending. "Holy shit," he said when I was done. "They really went full Parasite, didn't they?" "What did you tell them?" "That I already bought a house." Mason's face broke into the biggest grin I'd ever seen. "You magnificent bastard. I bet they shit themselves." "Pretty much." "Good. Fuck 'em. Want a drink?" We sat in his shop until midnight, talking about my plans for the house. Finally, I told him about bringing the Charger home. "When are we dragging her out of storage?" he asked. "This weekend?" "Hell yes. It's about time that beauty saw daylight again." I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The texts started that same night. Jessica sent me a photo of the kids crowded together on their bunk beds, with the caption, "Look how cramped they are. Do you really think this is fair?" I didn't respond. What was I supposed to say? That buying a house for myself had somehow magically caused their apartment to shrink? The next day, I woke up to 25 missed calls from Mom and a series of increasingly frantic voicemails. "Blake, we need to talk about this. You're being unreasonable. Think about the children." Jared chimed in with his own guilt trip. "I thought family mattered to you, but I guess I was wrong. Mom couldn't even sleep last night because of how upset she is." I showed Mason the messages when he came by to help me move into the new house. Jesus Christ, he said, scrolling through my phone while carrying a box marked kitchen stuff. It's like they're running a guilt trip factory. You want me to respond to any of these? What would you say? Something about how their housing crisis isn't your emergency, but with more creative curse words. I muted their numbers and tried to focus on settling into my house, but it was hard to concentrate when my phone kept buzzing with notifications. They'd moved on to Facebook, posting passive-aggressive messages about family loyalty and sacrifice. Jessica shared a photo of the kids with the caption, "Some people forget where they came from. Family sacrifices everything for you, and this is how you repay them." The comments were brutal. People who didn't know the full story were calling me selfish and ungrateful. My own aunt, who I hadn't spoken to in years, called to lecture me about putting family first. "I heard about what's happening with Jared," she said. "Can't you find it in your heart to help? Family comes first, Blake." This was the same aunt who'd forgotten my birthday every year growing up. But sure, now she wanted to talk about family loyalty. I blocked her number and kept going, but the harassment was taking its toll. "You know what your problem is?" Mason said, installing new locks on my front door without me even asking. "You're playing defense when you should be playing offense." "What do you mean?" "I mean you're letting them control the narrative. They're telling everyone you're the asshole who abandoned family. Time to tell your side." But I wasn't ready for that yet. I kept hoping they'd just move on. And honestly, why waste my time on that? I didn't care. The weekend after I moved in, Mason showed up with his truck and trailer. "Today's the day," he said. "Operation Charger Liberation is a go." We drove to the storage facility in comfortable silence. When I rolled up the metal door and saw Grandpa's car sitting there under a dusty tarp, I felt something crack open in my chest. "Damn," Mason said softly. "She's beautiful." We pulled off the tarp, and even covered in 3 years of dust, the Charger was stunning. B5. Blue metallic paint that still had depth under the grime, chrome bumpers that needed polishing but weren't rusted, and those classic rally wheels that made every muscle car look badass. "She's gonna need some work," I said, running my hand along the fender. "But the bones are solid." "That's what weekends are for," Mason said, hooking up his trailer. "Let's get her home." Loading the car was emotional in a way I hadn't expected. This was the last piece of Grandpa I had, and finally bringing her to a place where I could work on her felt like honoring his memory. When we got her into my garage, Mason cracked open 2 drinks, and we just stood there looking at her. "Your grandpa had good taste," he said. "What's the plan? Get her running first, then we'll see what she needs." That became our Saturday routine. Mason would show up with coffee and donuts. We'd spend the morning working on the Charger, and then sit on my back porch drinking and talking shit about everything from work to family to whatever game was on TV. The car became our therapy. Every bolt we turned, every part we cleaned or replaced, was another step away from the family drama and towards something that was purely ours. Mason had a way of making even the most frustrating mechanical problems seem manageable. "The carburetor's flooded again," he'd say, not looking up from the engine bay. But that's just her way of saying she missed us. Working on the Charger gave me something to focus on, besides the constant harassment from my family. When my phone buzzed with another guilt trip text, I could just go work on the car, instead of spiraling into anger. The breaking point came when Jared and Jessica showed up at my house uninvited. I was in the garage with Mason, trying to get the Charger's engine to turn over for the first time in 3 years, when I heard car doors slamming in my driveway. I looked up to see all 3 kids running toward my back gate while Jared and Jessica followed behind, carrying overnight bags. "Surprise!" Jessica called out cheerfully. "We thought we'd come for a visit." Mason and I exchanged a look. He quietly reached for his phone to document everything. I stood up, wiping my hands on a shop rag. "I don't remember inviting you." "Come on, Blake," Jared said, rolling his eyes. "We're family. We don't need formal invitations." "Actually, you do," I said, blocking their path to my back door. "This is my house." "Don't be like that," Jessica said. "The kids have been so excited to see your new place. Look how happy they are." Mason Jr. and Lily were indeed running around my yard, but they were trampling my herb garden and pulling flowers out of the planters I'd just arranged. Little Emma was sitting in my tomato patch, making mud pies with the dirt I'd just prepared. "Get them out of here," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "They're just kids," Jared said. "They're not hurting anything. They're destroying my garden. Get them out now." "Why are you speaking like that, bro?" Jared looked up from his phone. "Get out of my house. Get out of my yard. Take your kids and leave." "You're being ridiculous," Jessica sobbed. "We drove all the way over here. I didn't ask you to come. I didn't invite you. This is my house, and I want you gone. Fine, Jared said, finally looking annoyed. But don't expect us to keep trying to include you in this family. You're making your choice. Yes, I said. I am. They left, but not before the kids had tracked mud through my house and Emma had broken one of my picture frames. I spent the rest of the day cleaning up the mess. Mason helped without being asked, and when we were done, we went back to the garage. Want to take your frustrations out on this carburetor? He said, handing me a wrench. She's being stubborn as hell. That night, after Mason left, I sat in the garage looking at the Charger and thinking about Grandpa. He would have told those people to go to hell years ago. Maybe it was time I started channeling more of his backbone. After I changed my number and blocked them on social media, the harassment stopped for a while. Mason and I spent weekends working on the house, building raised garden beds to replace what the kids had destroyed, fixing up the den, installing a new ceiling fan in the bedroom. But our main project was the Charger. We got her running after 3 weeks of weekend work, and the first time that 440 roared to life, I swear I felt Grandpa smiling somewhere. Listen to that, Mason said, grinning as the engine settled into a smooth idle. That's the sound of freedom right there. I started to hope that maybe they'd finally gotten the message. I threw myself into work, spent weekends fixing up my house and working more on the car, and even started dating again. I felt like I could breathe. That's when Mom showed up at my door with a peach cobbler and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Hi, honey, she said, like we'd just talked yesterday instead of weeks ago. I thought I'd stop by and see how you're doing. Stupid move, I let her in. She set the cobbler on my kitchen counter and looked around the house like she was taking inventory. This is lovely, Blake. You've done a wonderful job. Thanks, I said, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wanted to apologize, she said, sitting down at my kitchen table. Things got a little heated, and I realized we were wrong to pressure you. You've worked hard for this house, and I should have respected your decision. For a moment, I felt myself softening. Maybe she really was trying to make amends. I've been thinking, she continued, maybe we could have a fresh start. I'd love to come visit again sometime. Maybe bring Jared and the kids. They'd love to see your place. And there it was. I don't think that's a good idea, I said carefully. Things are still pretty tense. Of course I understand, she said with that fake smile. But it would be nice for the family to see what you've accomplished. And the kids would love that backyard. I noticed how her eyes kept darting around the room, like she was measuring the space. How she asked detailed questions, whether I had a spare key hidden anywhere. After she left, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The timing seemed too convenient. She'd spent weeks harassing me, and the second I cut them off, she suddenly wanted to make peace. I decided to trust my instincts. Mason had already installed the security system, and I made sure all my windows were secure. 3 days later, I found out why. I'd gone out to run errands. Walmart, Lowe's, picking up a new starter for the Charger. Normal Saturday morning stuff. I got home around noon, arms full of shopping bags, and immediately noticed Jared's SUV parked in my driveway. My heart started racing. I fumbled with my keys, trying to get the door open, and that's when I heard them inside. Voices. Laughter. The sound of kids running around. I pushed open the door and found Jared, Jessica, and all 3 kids making themselves at home in my living room. They'd brought luggage. They were unpacking. What the hell is going on? I demanded. Oh, hey, Blake, Jared said, like this was perfectly normal. We decided to move in while you were out. Mom gave us her key. What key? I stared at him. Are you insane? Don't be dramatic, Jessica said, pulling clothes out of a suitcase. We really need the space, and your house is perfect for us. Mom said you'd understand. Mom doesn't live here, I shouted. I do. Look, Blake, Jared said in that condescending tone he'd perfected as a kid. You're single. You don't need all this space. We have 3 kids. It makes sense. I pulled out my phone and started dialing 911. Seriously, Jessica said. You're calling the cops on your own family? Watch me, I said. When the Knox County Sheriff's deputies arrived, Jared and Jessica tried to explain that they were family, like that gave them squatters' rights. The officers weren't impressed. They told them they were trespassing and needed to leave immediately. This is ridiculous, Jared muttered as he packed up their stuff. We're your family. No, I said, watching them load their luggage back into their SUV. Family doesn't break into each other's houses. After they left, I called Mason. They what? He said when I told him what happened. Moved in. The whole family with suitcases. I'm coming over. Don't touch anything until I get there. He showed up 20 minutes later with a toolbox and what looked like murder in his eyes. Where'd they go? He asked, looking around like he expected to find them hiding somewhere. Gone. The cops made them leave. Good. Now we're changing these locks, and I'm installing some upgrades they won't see coming. But that wasn't enough for me anymore. I was done. I called a lawyer and had cease and desist letters drafted for all of them. The letters spelled out everything they'd done, the harassment, the break-in, the social media attacks, and made it clear that any further contact would result in legal action. Mason had another idea. You know what you need? He said, pulling something out of his truck bed. I got you a housewarming gift. It was a custom doormat that read, "Family not welcome," in bold black letters. Had this made special, he said, grinning. Thought you could use some truth in advertising. I burst out laughing, the first genuine laugh I'd had in months. You're insane. Nah, I'm practical. Now everyone knows where they stand before they ring the doorbell. That same day, I did something I'd never done before. I fought back. I posted my own social media update, calmly explaining my side of the story. I didn't name names, but I laid out the facts, that I'd bought a house for myself, that certain family members had expected me to house them for free, and that when I refused, they'd launched a campaign of harassment that included breaking into my home. The response was immediate. Friends I hadn't heard from in years reached out to offer support. Co-workers from the fabrication shop who'd heard whispers about the drama came forward to say they'd been in similar situations. Even some of my extended family members, people who'd been getting a very different version of the story, apologized for judging me. But the best part was the silence from Jared, Jessica, and my parents. For the first time in months, they stopped texting, stopped calling, stopped showing up uninvited. I'd found my voice, and it was powerful. A few weeks later, I got a letter from a lawyer representing Jared and Jessica. They were threatening to sue me for alienation of affection and intentional infliction of emotional distress. That got me laughing. My lawyer laughed too when I showed him the letter. This is ridiculous, he said. They don't have a case. If anything, you could sue them for harassment and trespassing. I considered it. I really did. But in the end, I decided I'd rather spend my energy building my new life than tearing down their old assumptions. That weekend, Mason showed up with Chinese takeout and a cooler full of drinks. Celebration dinner, he announced. You officially survived your family trying to destroy your life. That calls for General Tso's and cheap drinks. We sat on my back porch, eating lo mein and watching the sunset over my perfect little yard. The next morning, we were back in the garage working on the Charger. We'd gotten her running, but now we were working on the details. New brake pads, fresh fluids, polishing the chrome until it gleamed like new. Your grandpa would be proud, Mason said, buffing out a scratch on the passenger door. Not just of the car, but of you standing up for yourself. Yeah, I said, adjusting the carburetor mixture. I think he would. Today, I'm sitting in my den, drinking coffee from my favorite mug, looking out at the tomato garden that I replanted and is now thriving. The morning light is streaming through my windows, and I can hear the Charger's engine warming up in the garage. Mason's getting an early start on installing the new exhaust system we ordered. My phone is quiet, my house is mine, and I'm finally truly free. Sometimes people ask me if I miss my family. Honestly, you can't miss what you never really had. So to anyone out there dealing with something similar, your life is your own. And sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is to cut the toxic people off, once and forever. And if you're lucky enough to have a friend like Mason,